Welcome back to the Budget Gamer channel, where we bring you critical and in-depth reviews of every indie game in the world. But not really, actually only 2 reviews a week, so we'll probably never be able to catch up with that amount of backlog. But in a valiant effort, today we're looking at Rift Adventure for the Nintendo Switch, which depending on your style of gameplay might actually be worth a look. Myself personally, I was a bit torn through most of the gameplay because it seemed like one type of game but felt like another. But that in no way means it was a negative experience. Diving into the story for Rift Adventure, it's another one of those adventure games that you kind of figure out what's going on as you play, but the general scenario is that you and your buddy dude adventure pal were crashing through a labyrinthian tomb and got to actually see the rebirth of some arcane evil. And through the advent of the game's title artifact, the Rift, your adventure buddy was stolen away, and for at least half of the game it's going to be your mission to get him back. And so tromping through 36 different levels with an additional 4 boss rooms makes a total of 40 different levels for the game, which depending on your 2D action platforming skills may take you several hours to beat. But be forewarned that there's a lot more going on in this game than you might expect, and the control scheme might catch you off guard and add its own additional learning curve. You'll navigate text boxes with the X button, you'll jump with the B button, you'll use the Y button to attack, and the A button for a special. Which I'll be painfully honest, no matter which console you're kind of at home with, that's gonna throw you off. However, the control scheme for the game aside, the platforming is actually fairly tight, and the combat, while not terribly challenging, does provide a challenge, but that's more because of the item system and the healing system in the game. As you play through Rift Adventure, you're not just playing through a 2D action platformer, you're also playing through a bit of a base builder and a bit of a tower defense game. And that's because your starting point city relies on how much money you spend to upgrade its economy. And of course, this hinges around the items that you buy, whether it's for healing or for upgrading your armor and your weapons. If you buy from the game's sanctioned market, the markup in the item price goes toward taxes, which helps actually boost the game's economy. But if you don't feel like grinding, you can buy from the black market and your city will stay at its solid state. That is, of course, considering that every few levels you can defend it from the onslaught of mobs, otherwise it's gonna consistently go down. If you have a strong economy, you can pretty much expect that your hospital will heal your full HP bar after every single dungeon run. But if that's not the case, you'll have to buy healing items from the shops, and one of the unique aspects of Rift Adventure is that you can't find healing items within the dungeon. Which means that one way or another, you're gonna be spending some cash. Thankfully though, inside the dungeon you can actually return back to the town without losing any of the gold or jewels that you may have found. But you'll have to make it all the way through the dungeon to the exit point Rift in order to complete that dungeon to push the game's continuing progress forward. Which of course means unlocking stronger equipment, whether it's armor that can help you defend and negate damage, or new blades that can help you increase your crit, or possibly do a little bit of lifesteal. But one of the unique aspects about Rift Adventure is that you don't spend the entire game trying to get your buddy pal back. And no, this is not a spoiler, you can't make it past the halfway point of the game without knowing this fact. After beating the second boss, you recover your buddy and actually start playing as the other character with different attack patterns and a different complement of equipment. But moving away from the game's general mechanics and getting into its presentation, visually, I'd say that it's fairly satisfying if you're into that pixelated retro aesthetic. But otherwise, there's a pretty staggering lack of diversity in the game, with even the text boxes between the 2 different characters being exactly the same for all interactions. The characters are well designed, but there's also not very many of them. The audio soundtrack and sound effects package of the game were pretty well done, with each enemy and each enemy attack having a different sound effect, and the soundtrack itself not standing out too much, but definitely changing for each different gaming scenario, vis-a-vis different soundtracks for boss rooms versus level, or the difference between hanging out in the town versus going into the tower defense aspect of the game. But as with every indie game out there, there's a few things a player might want to be aware of before diving into the game and investing their time and their money. And first and foremost is that this isn't just a 2D action platformer. Like I said before, there are elements of tower defense and elements of a base builder, and if you really want to get the most out of the game and have the largest advantage moving forward into later levels, you'll have to engage in all aspects. But this does bring us to the game's next critique, which is the general game balance between all of these different aspects. Obviously, level progression hinges around clearing the dungeons, but this is also tied to the shop's inventory, and the amount of dungeons you can clear also is directly tied to the amount of gold that you might be able to collect, and therefore how much you might be able to spend. And one thing that I noticed through my own playthrough is if you do spend a lot of money, whether it's through buying items for the purpose of health or changing out your equipment semi-regularly, it doesn't really matter if you're successful at the tower defense portions because the amount of capital you spend can keep your city top tier. And so it just caused me to wonder why there needed to be so many aspects of the game other than possibly nurturing this investment of the player that they need to keep pushing forward. One other note about the game, on the same level as consistently needing to push forward, is the fact that the game constantly kind of goads you into needing to grind for cash. And this is really well achieved by the fact that you can't heal yourself during a dungeon, so you pretty much have to make it through with whatever limited healing items are available at that time. And as shop inventories are directly linked to your progress through the game, not how much money you have, even if you are grinding for gold, you might not have anything to spend it on. Or at least not until you clear several more dungeons. And this is just something that I thought stood out as strange because they could have used the shop inventory as a real reason to try and push forward and grind for more gold, but instead it seemed like the shop inventory was just a bit arbitrary. And it kind of made me wonder why better weapons and armor weren't just something you found in later dungeons, because the amount of gold that you gain pushing through seemed to always be enough to buy the next upgrade. Looking at Rift Adventure as a whole experience though, the reason I said early in the review that I felt kind of torn with my experience in general is that the little mini platforming adventure areas with the 3-star marks that are honestly very mobile made it feel like a cheap environmental platformer more set for a mobile genre. But the fact that the entire game built toward a large overarching adventure with boss fights and a continuous goal made it feel like a real console-developed adventure game. And so while there were a handful of things that stood out to me as just odd design choices like the tower defender aspect or the fact that shop items unlocked as you progressed and didn't really nurture any investment, and the fact that the controller scheme was completely backwards to what I would expect for a platforming adventure game, overall I was invested in the campaign and I really wanted to see what happened at the end. And so I'd have to say, for a couple of dollars on the eShop, if you are remotely interested, it might be worth your time. But that might is a big might that really hinges on your own personal preferences of platforming style. If you're not a fan of the little 3-star achievement for the mobile styles, and you're more a fan of the true immersive, full-length, overarching 2D action platformers, then maybe that's just a presentation that's not quite going to do it for you. But anyway, that does about bring us to the end of the review of Rift Adventure, brand new to the Nintendo Switch's eShop. So if you enjoyed the review, or especially if you found it helpful, feel free to throw us a comment or a like to show your support, and don't forget to click that little bell icon when you subscribe to stay updated with the latest content. Because like I said earlier, we are throwing out 2 unique indie game reviews a week, and with thousands of indie games out there, probably some are going to be some you've never even heard of. And with new and interesting indie games coming out literally every single day, whether it's an easy hard pass or an absolutely unforgettable gem, chances are if it's on the Switch, you're going to find out about it right here. But anyway, this has been The Budget Gamers. As always, thanks for watching.